the 3 adjustment programs, 12 reviews, and more than 200 billion euro paid. And then, what is the situation now in Greece? Has this solved the problem? Will it solve the problem as the Eurogroup gives the impression? The reality is the following. You know it. The debt is more than the double of the Eurozone. The economic growth is 0 this year, last year, and will be negative this year. So what you don't see on this slide is the minus 0.6% negative growth forecast for Greece in 2016. So that it's more than 2% lower than the Eurozone average, and the unemployment rate is more than the double, 25% compared to the Eurozone. And instead of the long press statement of the Eurogroup saying everything is under control, I think there is another truth about Greece. Mainly, our conclusion is that things are not under control concerning Greece, and that a lot of things went wrong. And what went wrong, that is what we have together with our partners in Greece and with the Institute, we have tried to analyze. So what we think what went wrong in Greece is that from the beginning, all these adjustment programs, MOUs, and the international institutions mainly focused themselves on the symptoms of the crisis and not on the root causes of the crisis. It's mainly they concentrate on the fiscal debt, the public debt, the financial imbalances, the lack of a primary surplus, the impossibility also to repay the loans. So mainly on this, I should say, the symptoms, the consequences of the root causes of the crisis. And what the institutions, Europe, IMF, did not do was to focus on the root causes of this crisis. And that is mainly the poor governance of Greece, the completely inefficient administration in Greece, clientelism, that is the root cause of the problem, weak institutions, of not existing even institutions, and a lack of competitiveness. That are the root causes of the crisis, and that has not been tackled. So instead of essentially attacking the lack of a growth model and the institutional problems in Greece, what the institutions have done is to look to the whole problem as mainly an economic issue and a debt issue, and it is not mainly a debt issue and an economic issue. It's an institutional issue and a lack of responses to that. Second, what went wrong is that in the whole now 12 reviews, in the 3 adjustment programs, in the MOUs, as we call it, it's only concentrated on a budget adjustment, in fact, killing the economy, putting the whole burden on the citizens and the small and medium companies of Greece, and not on the state, not the burden on the public sector, on the administration. And this gives you a good what is happening. If you look to the whole package, 90% of all measures of these programs are taxes and taxation. And only 10% is the reduction of waste in the public expenditure. And it's the second reason of the failure in Greece for the moment, and the fact that Greece is not recovering. The response has been dramatically concentrated on taxation, and taxation putting the burden on citizens and on small and medium companies in Greece, and not on the public expenditures. And 3, what you see is that the measures have a very limited effect. And what we have done is to scrutinize, to analyze, together with our partners and with the Institute, what is now really the courses, the implementation of these 3 adjustment programs and of these 12 reviews? Well, the first thing what we have seen and what we see is that there is an enormous low compliance rate. There is a lot of legislation, but there is no action, no implementation. It's morely so they regulate, they make laws, and then it stops merely. And in all adjustment, you see here the compliance rate as we see it on the 22nd of May of this year, so as we speak a few days ago. Well, officially nominal compliance rate is 43%. 43% of the measures asked under the different adjustment programs have nominally been realized. But in reality, in our assessment, it's only 15%. There have been legislation, but there has been no implementation. And you see in the slide, I will not give all points, but the very important issues that have not been tackled, not nominally, and certainly also not really. And also in important files that have not only partially been observed. And partially been observed, that means that legislation has been done, but the implementation has never followed. And you see important things like market reforms, like, for example, energy market liberalization, all important elements of the adjustment programs that not have been realized. And why this is the case? Because there is, in fact, no serious monitoring. Also, the monitoring by the institutions is purely political driven, not to disturb Greece, not to disturb the financial markets, and certainly not real objective fact-finding missions. And I think that Jean Arthuis in a few moments will testify how it works in reality, because he made part of the fact-finding mission, the scrutiny mission of the European Parliament to Athens. And that brings me to the second reason why it doesn't work in Greece, and it is that the reforms are, in many cases, be reversed by later decisions. And we give you a few examples. 2 important laws, one on income tax code, a second on tax procedure code. Well, they have been made, but they have been changed 18 times in 17 months for the income tax code. And that has been the case for 10 times in 18 months in the tax procedure code. So they launch, a reform is launched as asked in the adjustment programs or in the MOUs, but they are immediately contradicted by amendments later on. And you're going to find in your papers a number of annexes who are examples of this. So this, what we show today are the slides, but you have in your files a number of annexes with the concrete examples of this, the difference between the nominal compliance rate and the real compliance rate, why it is so, and how later reforms are a reversal of what is needed in Greece. There is also the government infighting, the fact that other policies of the governments are contradicting the adjustment programs. For example, there is more competitive needs, but there is an increase in the corporate tax from 26 to 29%. Or there is a need to reduce the administrative burden, one of the actions under the adjustment program, and then there are 9 new tax measures that have been launched in 2015, increasing the administrative burden. Or, for example, there has to be a better managing of the social benefits, and then there is another law not foreseen in the adjustment programs who is doing exactly the opposite as what is needed. And then the fourth problem is that mainly the most of the decisions, because everybody, and also it's normal, journalists and we politicians are concentrated on the omnibus that is going in the parliament, that has been approved in the parliament on Sunday. But besides that, the real things are happening in regulations outside the scope of the parliament, outside the scope of the democracy. And what we give here to you is how you see that there is, that already started under Papandreou, but that there is an increase, an inflation in executive orders. Besides the legislation in Greece. So there is no parliamentary involvement, and there is an increase in more and more regulations directly coming from the government side and not in fact scrutinized by the parliament. And that brings me to the last one of the last slides of the problem. Why it does not work? Because there are no independent authorities anymore in Greece. 4 of the 9 independent authorities who have to scrutinize all this have no president, and 2/3 of the members of these independent authorities, their term of office is expired. So they are not even reappointed in this independent authority. So independent authorities to scrutinize the whole process are not working and not longer functioning. And finally, what we see is that as the previous governments, because there is, in my opinion, and in our opinion, not the big difference between the previous governments and the actual governments, what we see is also this administration, Greek administration, is exercised full political control on the public administration, and we give you a few of these examples of it. Secretary Generals are not appointed on merits or on evaluations. It's purely based on their affiliation to the political parties in power. The same for public contracts. Well, they are simply frozen by the actual administration. If not, they can be changed and directed towards companies that are nearer to the parties in government. So the third adjustment program, next point, is in fact more of the same. There is no a big change between the first, the second, and the third. The figure is different. It's 86 now, and not more than 100. It's a 3-year implementation horizon. There are, in principle, a number of good new initiatives, like modernizing the public administration. But if you look then to the reasons why, in our point of view, this will be going wrong again. There is no, focus on better governance, on clientelism. It's mainly on the fiscal and financial measures, leading further to hypertaxation. There is also no real strategy. It's so intertwined because it's a clustering approach that it ends nothing. At the end, nothing happens at all, and it's purely the mathematical approach, the one-size-fits approach of the IMF. Purely mathematical, primary surplus, debt ratio, fiscal deficit, that are the triangle, the 3 important figures, and that is absolutely not dealing with the crises. And that brings me to the last part of the presentation. What is the way out? We think that we need a fully other approach in the case of Greece. This is leading to nothing. And if the government authorities think that they're going to go back with this to the markets in 2017, they can forget it. They shall never go back to the markets with what is happening for the moment in Greece. What we are proposing is that we get rid of this old-style adjustment programs and MOUs that only focus on symptoms, only focus on on these three items: primary surplus, debt ratio, and fiscal deficit. We get rid. This is not tackling the root causes of the problem in Greece. Secondly, we propose a new joint Greece-EU plan to modernize the economy and the society of the country. That is the most important thing to do, and that is not happening. And for that, we propose 4 actions to kickstart the economy right now. Because the problem is that if we continue to have zero growth, or even negative growth, as in 2016, nothing will really happen. And also combined with the new governance in the Eurozone itself. And what are these 4 actions? Remove barriers in the society, in the Greek society. There are many Greek products, many service markets are still closed, are closed professions, and they are not open. Secondly, there needs to be also a private investment environment. That is not the case. People with ideas don't find cheap investment credits today in Greece. We need that the EFSI, that is this investment tool of the European Union, is used in Greece. There is only one EFSI deal signed for Greece. So we made a huge thing of more than 200 billion, and there is one deal that concerns Greece. While Greece should have, I shall not say all deals of the EFSI, but a lot more than the average. And finally, we need drastically to lower the tax burden on low incomes, middle incomes, and certainly on the SMEs. Otherwise, this will not fly. The second is we need to combat clientelism. What is not happening in the MOUs and the adjustment programs, as I said, is purely mathematics. Depolitize the administration, reintroduce what has been abolished by previous governments, the evaluation of all civil servants. We need to have transparent and uniform rules for the financing of political parties and the media, what is not the case now. And we need to make a fast-track transition to e-government. And then there is a third important thing, that is to modernize the justice system, digitalize the system, codification. The High Court judges appointed not based on their political affiliation, and then certainly the property and investor protection laws have to be strengthened the fastest as possible, so to give again confidence to foreign investors and to increase FDI, foreign investment in Greece. And then finally, the tax collection. Yeah, if you change 18 times in a few months the tax legislation and the tax code and the tax procedure code, that is not the way to solve the problem. We have also to strengthen the use of credit and bank cards and to enforce the electronic networking and the controlling by electronic invoice systems for the tax collection. That are the 4 big reforms. Or no, I have to say changes. I have learned that I can never use the word reform for Greece because people are tired of reforms that never happened in the country. So that's the reason why I say instead of reforms that never happened, what we need is a real change in the economy and in the society in Greece based on these 4 elements. And then the economy will recover, and then the problem will be solved. And if we continue with the adjustment programs and the MOUs as this stands now, nothing will happen. We're going to have a further deterioration of the situation in Greece. Stavros Theodorakis.
Σας δώσω λίγο χρόνο για να πάρετε τα ακουστικά σας. Ευχαριστώ βέβαια τον...
Je remercie bien sûr Guy pour cette invitation.
Σήμερα μαζί σας. Η Ελλάδα ευτυχώς Δυστυχώς ίσως έχει φύγει από τα πρωτοσέλιδα της Ευρώπης, οπότε δεν μπορώ να είμαι απολύτως σίγουρος για το τι είναι αυτό που σας ενδιαφέρει να ακούσετε.
I'm not quite sure exactly what to tackle first of all in talking about Greece. I'd like to relate a little anecdote, if I may, first of all, about the situation in my country. As you know, Mr. Tsipras and Syriza are in government with a very far-right party, the Independent.
Κυβερνητικού σχήματος, στην προεκλογική περίοδο του καλοκαιριού, πήγαινε στα νησιά και έλεγε μια συγκεκριμένη υπόσχεση. Όσο υπάρχω εγώ σε αυτή την κυβέρνηση, δεν θα αυξηθεί ο φόρος στα νησιά. Την Κυριακή που μας πέρασε,
Representative of the other side, the defense minister of Greece. The same person went to the islands. He went to a specific island, in fact, and he declared that he believes that the increase of taxation on the islands is a criminal action against the country and shouldn't have happened. So this is dishonest, and we have to take a decision, and we have to say to the Greek population, decisions have been made in Greece that shouldn't be respected. And we've got other members of the government formation. It's said, for example, that the merchant marine minister in Greece has been saying that we won't be selling off ports to the Chinese, but then he co-signs such a deal with the Chinese, and the next day holds a meeting and says this was a decision. And indeed, we won't be handing our assets over to the Chinese. So we still have a situation where people are committing fraud, evading taxes. One decision is made, and this decision seems to be, if you like, just satisfying party political needs. I think Guy gave a very good analysis. He went into analytic detail. I'm not going to be so analytical, but what I would like to say are the main problems facing us today in Greece. Number one problem is this lack of confidence, lack of trust. People are very suspicious against politicians, and quite rightly so. And, of course, Europe is the subject of great suspicion. They're very suspicious of the situation vis-à-vis Europe. So we can say with confidence that there isn't any confidence, any trust. And obviously, it's quite logical that they do not trust the politicians after what I've said about what's been happening over the last few months. And as all of Europe knows, these decisions that are being taken in Greece are just not believable. No becomes yes, and yes becomes no, following on from certain pressures which are brought to bear on those who are governing us. The biggest problem in this particular period is the lack of investment in Greece. We've got a big drop in wages, and investment is now half of what other European countries have. It's a very small percentage of GDP, in fact, in Greece at present. The next big problem that I'd like to mention is the continuously increasing taxation. VAT, for example, but they generally choose taxes which involve less income for the state. So we have 17 billion to be collected in taxation, which we haven't succeeded in raising. So the big problem for the country is the way the political components of government are actually relating or acting with the state. I'm talking, for example, state bodies, the banks, the education, and with business. The interaction is a problem. Potami has been created, and one of our objectives is to try to effect recovery. But do we have forces in Greece today that are going to work with us, or is it just small political groupings that are going to support us in that? At the moment, in Greece, I would say to you, we do have the forces in the economy and within the parties and in the wider society who are asking for these big changes and this recovery. The Greeks are tired, and they're tired of chasing their tails, and tired of these memorandums which just lead to nothing. And the only optimistic note I can introduce here is that I can say that people in Greece do want the state to function. They want to be a normal country, as it were. But there's a big battle ahead for that. And my view is that we can't really do this in this staged or phased way that has been happening recently, because all this just gets absorbed somehow. We need a big step forward. We need a big slew of changes. We have to have changes in the justice system, in education, and so on. The country has two roads before it. We can have a memorandum that solves some problems that Greek politicians hadn't had the courage, hadn't dared to tackle. The old political system was such that basically when they were faced with bankruptcy, they just came to Europe to ask for money, but they didn't actually themselves put forward any solutions to the country. So that's one road forward. And another is a much more difficult road forward. It's where we have a consensus between all factors of the community, a new deal, a new beginning. That's what we call it in Potami, which will involve all of society. This has to be agreed on also with our European colleagues, because we would like, over the next few years, to change the mistakes that have occurred. There have been some mistakes also made on the part of Europe. It's not popular anymore to be pro-European in my country, and that's because of the mistakes that have been made in Brussels and in Strasbourg. It hasn't been possible to really put forward the correct solutions, to express the correct solutions. We haven't got many economists in Greece who say that these new decisions, that these new measures are going to lead us to something better. They obviously deal with some issues in abeyance, small changes. However, we can't see full development. We have problems that are common to all of the South. We have a lot of unemployment and other problems which are shared by other countries of the South. I think you are all aware of that, and the Juncker plan and everything that needs to be done by Europe for the South. But for Greece, we need to have a new deal and have to have agreement between the state, the market, and other players such as business and so on. Greece is living through a problematic situation which may not be understood properly by countries in the north. And we're seeing a brain drain in Greece. They're going to these northern countries, and we, of course, have the position vis-à-vis the migrants who are arriving in Greece. But we're facing this problem of the brain drain. Scientists, skilled people are leaving and wanting to work in northern countries. If that continues, we won't be able in the future to tackle the problems and get the investment that we need. So that's why I call it a new deal that's necessary, a consensus, an agreement that has to be countrywide, and we have to have agreement between politicians and business, between the state sector and the private sector, and just general agreement. And because in particular, over recent months, we've had decisions which have been taken, for example, concerning the pensioners in the country who are in a terrible situation. And then we also have the problems of young people under 40. So we have sectors of society who are particularly hit. We've got sectors that need to be protected: tourism, culture, shipping, crucial sectors for the country. And so for all of that to be achieved, we need a specific plan, and we have to be daring. I'd like to conclude here by saying that I'm very happy if you'd like to ask me any questions, but I'd like to say we need a new agreement. We need to create new trust and confidence with Europe, with the European institutions, but also an agreement and confidence within the country, and not just populism. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks to my political group and thanks to Guy Verhofstadt. I went on the first mission with the European Parliament on financial assistance. We went to Athens on the 30th and 31st of March. We met with parliamentarians, we met with members of government, Mr. Tsipras himself, with players in the economy, representatives of social organisations, political parties, but we didn't actually get access to any documentation. I'm thinking specifically about financial documentation that could have been subject to certification or scrutiny by the Court of Auditors. It seems that Greece is doing better than a year ago, at least on paper. The Greek Parliament is very active. It receives texts in the evening to be voted very often the following day. It's a uni-chamberal parliament. However, there is no second reading, and I'm not sure that really allows scope for a democratic debate. All of this, no doubt, allows them to meet the expectations of creditors and to tick off points on the checklist. However, we doubt that there really is appropriation of these objectives and true implementation of legislation, as Mr. Verhofstadt said, and fiscal stability. We come back to legislation on taxation on income almost every month, and what is striking is that taxes taken from those whose income is known, i.e. people earning a salary and pensioners, but anyone who has any activity outside of this status of an employee earning a salary, they can adjust their declared income without directly seeing the impact of increased taxes. The administration is highly politicized, as we've heard, and we've seen no sign which would lead us to believe that Tsipras would do things differently from PASOK or the New Democracy in this respect. Structural reform is expected, but there's still no record of this. How do you expect to recover tax on property if there is no property registration? How would you deal with shipbuilding yards if there's no registration? Well, last year it was noted that there was a stretch of motorway in Greece that had no exit because they couldn't decide who the owner was of the land where the motorway should be constructed. Products do not meet expectations. There's an expectation for 2.5 billion of revenue in 2016. We're far from the 55 billion that had been forecasted. Investment remains at very low levels, and interest rates are particularly high, particularly for credit for consumers. SMEs who are burdened by increasing taxation attempted to delocalize, move elsewhere. That's not an option for everyone, but some businesses have moved to Bulgaria. Jobs are outsourced too. I'd like to sum up my impression of the situation by 3 points of reflection. Greece naturally needs to review its governance. It needs more direct paths between the instances of government and citizens on the ground. And I don't think we can leave Greece with such high debt levels. There is a need to reduce Greek debt. Creditors at some point will need to recognise their losses. That calls for structural reforms, very strong commitments, and an evaluation and control system which is clear. However, current plans, such as those which were concluded this morning, they are all about meeting deadlines. Moving on to my second point, I think that the Eurozone also needs to question itself, because we've now been living through 6 years of crisis within the Eurozone. And we cannot say that the Eurozone today is able to get clear and frank decisions from governments. I think there is an urgent need to reform governance of the Eurozone, in fact, giving it true governance. Because look at the amount of energy that's been wasted for the past 6 years. We've talked about 6-packs, 2-packs. We've lost enormous amounts of time and no doubt money. And throughout this time, the lower and middle classes in Greece are suffering. Investors are constantly uncertain. And European citizens themselves are asking questions. It's democracy that's being tested here. We need institutional change, radical change. Budget for the Eurozone. We need true economic, financial, budgetary governance with a full-time president. We need a European monetary fund, which no doubt today is the European Financial Stability Mechanism. And we need democratic legitimacy, which could be gained through monitoring the governance of the Eurozone. For instance, through an institution that would bring together representatives of the European Parliament and the parliaments of the member states of the Eurozone. Now, my third point, and I think this is very important, is that I think we need public debate. This is a highly political issue, and the European Parliament should be the institution where this debate should take place. Well, those are my impressions and observations that I wanted to share. Thank you.
See, Mr. Kirkos will give you also, based on the annexes, you have them, these annexes, more detailed examples of what the reality on the ground is in Greece compared to what the Eurogroup is thinking.
We took 4 months to collect in these statistics that we present to you today, but this is open to anyone. Anyone can have access to this information. We have the Panayoti Kakachuli here together with me, who helped us in this work. I think it's quite impressive what we've collected, because we see that this memorandum has been implemented exactly in the same way as the other memorandum, because they have not really tackled the structural problems. That emerges from the statistics, and we can see that this government, as well as the previous one, has not taken enough steps to strike at clientelism in the country. And indeed, we can see that we've got a new tax situation which simplifies things, but it has 193 articles to it. And these are articles which have been modified continuously, which then changes all the legislation from the very beginning again. So it's like a Pandora's box, taking into account the various interests. How, therefore, can we have a proper policy? How can we have a situation in which one thing is voted on and another thing is implemented? Economic crime, for example, where we've had examples of how the clientelism system influences the situation. And this kind of legislation was voted through in Parliament, and some of these civil servants who had got their job thanks to clientelism were transferred, but then at the end of the day, it was mismanaged, and we had further people who didn't have a job, and other situations where there weren't enough people to do the job. So the situation was mishandled. If we look at a business, for example, which has containers, we have restrictions placed now by the legislation. If the containers are not considered as goods, then they are defined in another way, and some, again, sections of business are happy with this kind of modification to the legislation. I could give you an example also with fruit. Which, for example, distinguishes between products containing fruit or fruit juices from abroad. So basically, these reforms are made, but they just lead to a certain confusion. I'm not going to go into many details, further details here, because I could give you many more examples. Transparency now, for example, that hasn't been achieved. The justice system, taxation control, tax evasion control. We still have situations where the state is held hostage by certain interests in business to protect their situation. So, agriculture, there are examples there as well concerning agricultural products, disorganization, and problems caused for those entrepreneurs in that sector and for the community as a whole. So that's the situation, and Europe is not properly monitoring this, and that's not how we can correct this situation. We see that when there are assessments that the situation has, instead of going forward, has gone backwards. So our proposal would be to do things completely differently. Thank you.
So you're going to find in the annexes, I invite you really to read them. So normally the annexes, I know it's not the most important thing that you receive, but in this case, please do it, read it, because you're going to see how formally the decision has been taken. Everything is green light for the institutions, but in reality, nothing is happening. And how it works. Electronic payments, for example, that has to replace cash payments. How everything formally has been done, but in fact, nothing changed. And so we have in 1D, Annex 2, Annex 3, Annex 4, if you have a little bit of time before you are really concentrating yourself on your article, go through the annexes to see how, in a certain way, perverted the system is and how it works. And how we can know that, but yesterday evening at 2 o'clock, they didn't want to know it anymore.
Okay, we have time for 2 or 3 questions. Depends a bit how long the questions are. So if you're a journalist and you want to ask a question, please raise your hand. The gentleman in the back.
There are several leaders in the world, political leaders, that think that debt release is a very good idea. So I would like to ask Mr. Verhofstadt, what is your opinion about that? Thank you.
Well, very short. Debt relief can be part of the solution if it is, first of all, based on the 4 elements here. You need to do the reforms, the change, and then it makes sense. Okay? But independently from everything, it doesn't make sense. It has to be part of the global new approach. That's my first thing. Secondly, and it's something different than the debt management measures that they have now put on paper. Because what is now on paper is essentially debt management measures on the short term, on the mid-term, and on the long term. But it makes sense, but only if it is a part of these 4 actions. Because otherwise, nothing will really be solved.
Any other questions?
Merci. C'est Griselda Pastor de la radio española SER. Je poserai ma question en français.
I will ask my question in French. I'm from Spanish radio. I have the feeling that you're not very happy to confirm that the current government is following Eurogroup recommendations. Would your political alternative be to refuse those recommendations? Who are you posing your question to me or to Mr. Stavros? Asks Mr. Verhofstadt. Well, what we've just explained in the presentation today is that anything that comes from an MOU or an adjustment programme is only aimed to address the consequences of the crisis and not the true root causes of crisis in Greece. The crisis in Greece is because there's no growth model, economic growth model, and it's an institutional crisis, and the MOUs and the adjustment programmes will do nothing to remedy that. Moreover, in reality, minimal action is taken and not the way it's being presented today. Mr. Theodorakis can add to that.
I'd just like to add something to what has been said by Guy. The memorandum for my party too, because we voted, has some adjustments, and in most cases it's a question of them being misinterpreted by the government. The policy of the government, the majority in Parliament, is essentially the way the texts are interpreted. You've got a text and some directions, and it's the way that that is implemented that is not good. I could give you lots of examples, but I'll give you one. In the insurance sector, money's coming from the insurance sector, which we could save that money. And the way that the government decided to tackle this was to actually leave a whole categories out of it, so that they could manage to save this money and create new enterprises. But this is really a misinterpretation, because they're actually having a negative effect on the income from that sector. In other words, they're penalising the people that are trying to be active and get a solution.
Lady over here. We have a microphone.
Adriana Ceretelli, Sole 24 Ore. Your proposal sounds very, very reasonable and very realistic. But where do you think you will be able to find a political consensus in Europe to get this proposal realized?
I think there is a consensus if I should make this presentation before the European Council, for example, to give only one example, of before the European Parliament, or even before the European Commission. Everybody should say, oh yes, that's true, that is what we need. But that has not been requested by the institutions until now. I compare this whole game with the marriage in which the two partners are cheating each other and don't do as it is happening. The institutions ask not the real change that is needed. And the government, well, the different governments, not one government, all the previous governments also, don't deliver on even these changes and these measures that are foreseen. And for them it's okay, because that makes that the clientelistic system and the politicized system in Greece can continue. So what we need, if there is a change need, we need to go into the heart, the political heart of the matter. And that's not, sorry, civil servants who can do that, technicians who can do that. It is politics. And that is what is not happening for the moment. So it's a game for the moment in which we say, yeah, we don't want to give you money, but at the end we give you money if you're compliant, but we know that you're not fully compliant. You see the difference? They officially are 43% of compliance rate of the measures that are asked. The reality is 14%. Naturally, they can say, no, it's 43 because legislation has been done, but that doesn't matter. It's what is in practice, what is the reality on the ground. There, it's 14%. But they close their eyes, and then they can continue and to say, okay, and now we do the third package. We start with the third package. And on the other hand, they say, okay, give me the money. We do a minimum necessary so that you can give me the money, but not real reforms that not change the public administration, the grip we have on that administration, the clientelistic system, and so on. So that's the reason why we say this MOU and adjustment program approach leads to nothing. And the proof is there. We are years after the start of this, and you have a negative growth in Greece. What we are doing? We are in fact, yeah, this economy is suffering because of the bad methods that are used, mainly by the institutions, and naturally with the cooperation of Greece, and Greece with the cooperation of the institutions.
Sur ce point, quand on...
On this point, now, when the Eurozone was set up, they hesitated between a rule or economic financial governance. And they opted for this rule was called the Financial Stability Pact. And in fact, today, we can see that breaking rules has not led to any sanctions. So rules today are not respected, and there's no government, to put it that way. So we need to bring the attention of the heads of state and government to this situation. And we're there to show that this isn't working. We need to tackle this differently. We need to raise these political questions with the public opinion, and not just leave it with the Troika, which is a sort of judicial administration, almost clandestine. And you don't discuss these issues openly because they're embarrassing. We need to bring this out in the open. And I think that this situation offers us some lessons that we can learn, that we can reach consensus on. To leave a country like this, well, the creditors mustn't hold any illusions about recovering the debt. When you give someone credit, you have responsibility. We have to ask ourselves, who were Greeks' creditors when this whole situation first started happening? They weren't controlled or monitored.
Βέβαια, θέλω να πω...
Yes, I would like to say, as a European citizen now I'm speaking, any country that's examined under the microscope in the European family will find faults. It's not just that Greece has certain deficiencies. However, in Greece, these problems seem to be more concentrated than in any other country in Europe. And I'm very glad you brought the question of the sustainability of the debt up, because this is a responsibility of the institutions. The big failure of the memorandums, no matter how you look at the figures, is the big pressure that was brought to bear in the GDP of the country, because the GDP has shrunk, and therefore the debt seems huge. You know, the figure speaks clearly, 180% of GDP, the debt. So this is a responsibility of the institutions of Europe, of the peoples of Europe. How can we deal with this huge debt which has come up in Greece and in other countries? And finally, another point. We want another kind of Greece, and a guarantee of obtaining that would be to look at the past, recent past, where we've welcomed in all the migrants to Greece. We were a shining example there. There was no proper government organisation regarding the accommodation and the welcome of these people, but hundreds of thousands of them came to Greece, and very few problems were created. despite the many problems we're facing in Greece. And comparing that to some other countries in Europe, that means that Greeks know how to do things, they can do things, they are sensitive to the issues. But we have to create the proper forces, as we said in this meeting, and get away from the populism and the old way of doing things. Thank you.